I had the honor of first listening to Leanne Betasamosake Simpson, who's a renowned scholar, writer, and artist, in 2010. That would be 15 years ago already, in Toronto. She came on stage and electrified the theater with her poetry and narratives about her people. Many of us in this room, I almost want to ask, how many of you have read and taught Simpson's stories and work? It's a lot of us. Poetry, essay books, which now comes to 9 books, including Rehearsals for a Living, co-written with Robin Maynard. This book was widely read and cited and shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction. But Island of Decolonial Love, which was your debut collection of stories, is and remains my personal favorite. It delves beautifully into the dailiness of loss, belonging, and identity within the ongoing project of Indigenous survivance. Simpson has been widely recognized as one of the most compelling voices of her generation and is an independent scholar and writer whose sovereign creative production challenges the intersections between politics, story, and song that allows her audiences to be brought into this rich and layered world of sound, light, and poetics. We're so lucky to have you here tonight, Leanne, and also tomorrow for a seminar with Brown students. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and we're so honored to engage you tonight. Welcome to the podium.
Bonjour, Ani Kinawaya, Giriga Vijuna Denuema, Kinigachi Nishnaabeg Ogiming Donjaba, Nagojawani Megwadoda, Betasamosake in Indigenous class. It's so lovely to be here in the beautiful homelands of the Nagara-Set people. Thank you, Maka, for inviting me. Thank you all for being here, especially all the students. I know you're very busy. My home is the North Shore of Lake Ontario, between the cities of Toronto and Ottawa. And like the Narragansett, every morning my ancestors got up and they made life. They were makers. They made their political systems and forms of governance. They made their food systems and education, their healthcare and foodways. And what they practiced as families, they practiced as communities and nations. They scaled up and across and forward and back. These systems of care were iterative and adaptive. They were concerned not with making a world, but with weaving ourselves into the existing natural world and ecological processes that reproduce our planet. And they were concerned with that and with doing that in diverse ways, in practices that ultimately brought forth more life on the planet, not just human life, but more life. They were profoundly concerned with the self-determination and autonomy of all living things that they shared time and space with. They saw life as an interconnected and interdependent collaboration with plants, animals, rivers, lakes, oceans, and all of the natural beings that make up our planet and that make up this present moment. A present moment that is birthed from the collapsing of the future and of the past. They knew that this practice of life was a network, and that this network was dependent upon a communal practice of deep relationality. They knew that the spiritual and material strands or relations that connect all living things are called an awendowin, our shared umbilical cord, connecting us to a parent made up of the sum of all of our lives, past, present, and future, the seen and the unseen, the opaque and the transparent, the permeable and the expansive, the cycled and renewed, the repaired and strengthened. To have a relationship of any kind, an awendowin is present. And an awendowin means that we do not waste life or lives or livings. They knew that the practice of the universe to be wawiyeyak, the philosophy of an interwoven system of circularity, a practice of cycling interdependence entwined with relational independence. My ancestors were weavers, and they knitted themselves into the world through the practices of kindness and empathy, consent and accountability, and I think something we all call solidarity. As everyone here knows, this present moment, one of climate catastrophe, of ongoing genocide in Nakba in Gaza, in Palestine, and the genocides in Sudan and Congo, a very intense attack on trans kids over the past 2 weeks, this present moment demands that we direct our dreams and actions towards making worlds that refuse capitalism and dispossession and the spectacular violences required to maintain them. As everyone here knows, this present moment demands that we figure out how to create and maintain robust constellations of coexistence and provide material support for anti-colonial movements locally and globally. As everyone here knows, the access of capital and the states protecting that capital are descending deeper into fascism in the global north, and the present moment demands that we come together and face our linked crises in a manner that ensures the sanctity of the planet for all species and generations yet to come. So today, I want to use our time together as a sort of anti-colonial refuge where we breathe and think and dream together and separately about the worlds we are making in our movements and the worlds we want to live in. I'm going to share a little bit of my thinking and dreaming, which will be coming out in a book form on April 22nd through Haymarket Books in the US called Theory of Water. Theory of Water refuses the settler colonial state and all of the violences that go into maintaining that state, and it looks towards water as a collaborator to dream, build, and make worlds where life is precious, where Palestinian life is cherished, where Jewish life is cherished, where Indigenous and Kashmiri and Tibetan and Muslim and Black life is cherished, where trans life is cherished, and where we care for the planet that sustains us all. Theory of Water is concerned with building worlds where the violence of capitalism and heteropatriarchy, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, and transphobia and colonialism are unthinkable. I'm going to share 3 excerpts today. The first one is an origin story. This one was told to me by Doug Williams, who was the elder that I worked with for several years from Curve Lake First Nation. I've heard him tell it orally 100 times, and I also helped him write down his version in a book that is called Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg, This Is Our Territory. But I'm going to share my version today. This story starts with Joué Manado, and Joué Manado often gets translated as God or the creator, but that's not really right. Joué Manado is a benevolent energy that loves living things unconditionally. Joué Manado is not a he. Joué Manado can be any of our genders in the Anishinaabe cosmology, and there's more than 2. So Joué Manado can be any one of those genders or none at all. Joué Manado is the precursor to life, the precursor to world building. And so the precursor to life wasn't simply a plan or a proposal or a campaign or an action or even an intention of something better. The precursor to life was love. Not a fleeting romantic kind of love, but a deep sense of care, hope, truth, and kindness. A loving anyway, a loving in all the ways. So before the idea of the world, before the making of the world, the inspiration, the know-how, the intercommunal creations, there was care and there was love. This tells me that love is a necessary precursor to world building. I understand love encoded in the word jouer as being unconditional, as an organizing force, a motion, and an ethic of caring. Jouer is a communal love, not bound up in the individual or the romantic. It's an ethic that is animated within our relations, and from there propels customs of kindness and generates empathy and systems of care for all the forms of life that make up our world. It's not a structure that negates emotions or normal responses to the violence of colonialism, responses that might include anger and resentment and even violence. Love in this form is a reenactment. And like all such practices, it can be wholeheartedly manipulated and exploited under colonial rule. It can be conditioned and manipulated and weaponized. But in this story and in this beginning, it is an organizing force and an architecture for the Anishinaabe cosmos, one amongst many other organizing forces, but an organizing force nonetheless. So Jouer Manado, the one that loves us all unconditionally, had a dream of the world, the one we know today, with the oceans and the mountains and the forests and the deserts and the plants and the animals and the humans. And with dreams and visions in my culture comes responsibilities. So Jouer Manado, when they had this dream, knew they had work to do to make it happen. So the earth happened and everything was created instantly and everything was beautiful. This went on for a long time. Everyone was getting along. And in Anishinaabe we call it kina b'madzuin, a big kindness, a big practice of kindness. I love how my people just skipped over the mechanics of how actually to build the world, but we're gonna get to the part that we need to pay attention to. So we're in this stage of kina b'madzuin, where everyone is kind. And Doug taught me that this peace didn't last, and that one day, everything started going very, very wrong. Everything was dying off. There was lots of violence. No one knew why. And he used to say, it could be that life is not that easy to keep. It could be that life is fragile. It could be that in making life, we don't always get it right. It could be that in isolation, no one individual or community has the knowledge we need to build worlds. It could be that world making is struggle. Most things died off. All the earthbound life died and was gone. Only the sun and the water was saved. This bothered Jouer Manado, and they were upset. This part of the story resonates with me, sitting on the edge of climate collapse and apartheid and genocide and overwhelming world endings. I imagine indigiqueer Jouer Manado in the sky world, scrolling on their phone, watching Netflix, in bed under a weighted blanket, feeling bothered because the place they had created got into trouble. But Jouer Manado does not stay in this place for very long. The spirits that lived in the sky went to Jouer Manado and they asked if they could help. Now, the first time Jouer Manado created the world, they did it alone, and it didn't work. Jouer Manado was now in no state to go back to the earth and start recreating, and so when help was offered, they agreed. They asked another spirit who was different in character and work than themselves to try. They asked Gijigo or Sky Woman, to go down to the earth to see if creation could be repaired. Gijigo work was not easy. The first time she tried, her 2 children died and she was consumed by grief. Something was not working right for Jouer Manado's dream. It wasn't coming together. Gijigo goes back to the sky world to visit with Jouet Manado and to try to figure out what happened. I imagine the two felt a deep despair, having both tried and failed, and now they are both grieving, perhaps stuck in the fog of bereavement, unable to see clearly. In the meantime, back on Earth, a great flood happens, covering the earth with water, washing over and nurturing the land, and changing the physical surface of the earth. Nibi, or water, saw the problem, and they did the work only they could do in hopes that it would move things along. Nibi didn't have to act. Nibi was thinking beyond themselves and their responsibility. Nibi was living in kindness, witnessing and empathizing the struggle of both Jouet Manado and Gijigo. They were witnessing and listening beyond themselves towards a new collectivity. They listened and they responded in the present moment. Within Anishinaabe world-making, water is crucial. For humans, we first exist in a water world, a world that meets all our needs and where we learn what it feels like to be safe. The water I breathe in becomes a constituent that makes up most of my body. The water that I breathe out becomes part of someone else's body. Water travels the world over, moving easily through land, air, soil, rock, and bodies. Said in another way, Nibi continually violates the home spaces of everything on the planet. It might take a very long time, but Nibi always escapes the container. Nibi reminds us that we can build all the enclosures we want, including our own bodies, but there are world-making forces building and maintaining the planet that are planetary and that are beyond us. In fact, if Nibi is enclosed, they work away, seemingly gently, incredibly persistent and unsuspecting until the enclosure is eroded away and an undercut or an arch or a hole appears as chasm and rupture. Nibi never gives up. They keep at it in the beginning when it seems absolutely impossible, through the years of seeing no progress, to the point where they think they might be imagining or wishing transformation, through the hopelessness of incremental change, until finally, after everyone but Nibi has given up, across an incomprehensible time frame for living things, a miraculous rupture. Perhaps world-making is the practice of communal struggle. Jouet Manado and Gijigo continued their visit in the sky world. They comforted each other. Jouet Manado encouraged Gijigo and told her not to give up, to keep trying. Gijigo eventually makes the decision to go back to the earth and to keep trying. She encounters Nibi's flood, a catastrophic upheaval that has left the world in a completely different place than when she was last there. Here's the world. It's only water. There is no land. There is no land back because there are no homelands and there are no humans. In time, Gijigo found animals in the water that had survived the flood because they could swim or fly, things like loons and beavers and muskrats. Chi Mikinak, or the snapping turtle, came to the surface and offered Gijigo a place to land and rest. The animals Gijigo found needed help. They needed care. They also needed a place to rest because they had been swimming or flying endlessly for days. Maybe they weren't even thinking of making a world at this point. Maybe they were only thinking of caring for the ones that were near exhaustion. Maybe they worked together to meet the material needs of their immediate community, which was a place to rest. Every being giving up what they could to support the others. Gijigo rested on the back of the turtle with the beavers and the muskrats and the other animals, a communal place of refuge. Over time, Gijigo noticed the design on the turtle's back. She ran her finger around the rim of the shell and felt its meaning. There were 13 parts in the middle and 28 sections around the edge. She felt its meaning because her body cycled each moon, and her body's practice of cycles enabled her to see the moon cycles on the turtle's back. The turtle shell was a map. 13 moons, or 13 full moons or months, 28 days each. Turtles still carry that map today, as does the moon, as do people who menstruate. The turtle was showing her that what was missing in Jouet Manado's previous design was cycling and renewal. Not even Jouet Manado is perfect because the job of Jouet Manado isn't perfection. The job of Jouet Manado is unconditional love. After a while, the loon, a bird that can swim and float, offered to dive to the bottom. The loon was gone for a very long time and then finally floated to the surface, drowned. The loon tried so hard, it had died trying. Same with otter, same with beaver. Next came the muskrat. Same thing, tried too hard, floated to the surface. But when the muskrat floated to the surface, Gijugo noticed they had a handful of earth. She put that handful of earth onto the turtle's back, and it grew into mountains and streams and lakes, and then into clouds and winds and rains and trees and beautiful animals, and this world was created. Sometimes there is a larger benefit to others in plowing through. Gijugo went back to the sky world, and she became the moon. And you can see her tonight because we saw her on the way here. She became the one to watch over and regulate the cycles needed to bring forth more life on Earth, her form cycles, and she visually reflects through her phases of the cyclical nature of the universe. Some people call her grandmothers, other people call her Dibigizis, the night sun. We all were given the responsibility of Minobamadzawin, of living in a way that contributes to the continuous rebirth of all living things on the planet. We were given the responsibility to not remake the world, but to fit into the complex networks of interconnection and interdependence of the ecosystems that make up the planet. Excerpt 2. Jackson Creek is a creek down the street from where I live in Peterborough, Ontario. It flows into the man-made Little Lake and then into the Otonabee River and eventually into Lake Ontario. There is a 4.5 kilometer trail along the creek that I run on in the spring and summer and fall and the parts of the winter that I can't ski on it. Jackson Creek is by most accounts an unremarkable urban creek, I imagine like every other urban creek in North America, and this is the body of water I spend the most time with every day. Today, the creek is beginning to freeze after the first big snowstorm of the winter brought nearly 30 centimeters to the ground. I was up early today on the snowmobile doing passes along the trail, compacting the heavy, wet snow so that possibly tomorrow another driver could attach the groomer. I started helping groom the ski trail in one of the pandemic winters. I volunteered at first just to keep my snowmobile skills up when I'm in the South, so that when I returned to work in the North, I didn't have to relearn how to drive the sled every time. Grooming certainly helped with that, but those technical skills were eclipsed by something else. Nearly every day, the snow was slightly different along the trail at Jackson Creek. I became drawn into the process of sintering. When a snowflake falls from the sky and lands on the earth, it immediately begins, or perhaps continues, a transformation as it forms bonds at temperatures below zero, so this isn't melting, as it forms bonds with its neighboring snowflakes or crystals to create the fabric of a snowpack. Sintering is a joining process, a transformative communal process that creates a fabric of former snowflakes bonded to each other. It is a process of changing from a singular angular snowflake to a more rounded form in formations of bonded snow crystals or a snowpack, a denser, more compact linked formation. As snow sinters, it settles and becomes denser, stronger, saggier under the influence of gravity. Sintering is a slow deformation. As a groomer, there are lots of factors that influence the sintering process, things like temperature and humidity, the time of day, the weather, who's using the trail and how. I think of none of those things each morning I'm on the skidoo. I think only of this idea that the first thing a snowflake does when it falls to the land from the sky world is to join bonds, actual physical bonds, with its neighbor. Snowflakes weave themselves into their environment in a way that doesn't destroy their neighbors, in a way that doesn't destroy themselves. Sintering is a process of bonding, of building coalitions with your neighbors. And those coalitions mean that packed, sintered snow on the trail has the staying power and remains long after spring has melted the snow around it. Snowflakes start out as a single nucleated dust particle that attracts water droplets that in turn freeze and accelerate into crystal form. The temperature and humidity of the sky world mold it into complex shapes as it moves through the atmosphere. No two are the same, and they act en masse and in commune to form magnificent storms, upheavals, and blankets. And when they arrive in their new environment, the first thing they do is sinter. The first thing they do is find a way to belong. Excerpt 3 is from a chapter called The One That Cleans the World. And I use a lot of a poem by Natalie Diaz from her book, Post-Colonial Love Poem. And it starts with a quote from Natalie. I carry a river. It is who I am. Aha, Makav. Nibi, the one that cleans the world, the one that does the unglamorous, underappreciated, unseen labor of washing and tidying up, the work that no one else will do. Nibi, the blood of the planet merging through subterranean and atmospheric vessels and circuitry. Nayano Nibimong Gichigaming, the Great Lakes, the heart, lungs, kidney, and liver, pumping, mixing, detoxing, carrying the past to the future. Nibi as medicine, a daily streaming for our circumnavigation. When our elders say water is sacred, they mean it is work on a scale beyond our comprehension. They mean Nibi is not disposable. Nibi is not capital. Nibi is a provocateur, enacting a theory and a body of knowledge about how to live inside the cacophony of life. She carries the river. I carry the ice. You carry an ocean. She carries a glacier. They carry the snow. He carries a marsh. Her carries the breath. It carries the spring. We, excluding them, carry the waterfall. We, including them, carry the waves. And while in this moment, Nibi might be hurt, horribly contaminated and reeling from the ongoing assaults of capitalism, left alone, we believe, as do many other indigenous peoples, Nibi will eventually revive itself, filtering, regenerating, and renewing, is already threaded through the web. Nibi might take a very long time and require an absolute rewiring of humanity. but we believe Nibi regenerates. Nibi and its unquenchable thirst for Minobamadzawin lives in resistance to disposability, despite being bought and sold, drained and contained, diverted and damned. Nibi is a fugitive, raining down a quest for renewal, cycling through time and across every border. Nibi is speaking through action, critiquing by making an alternative. Nibi's theory, the theory of water, is a scathing indictment of every part of the death machine that has left to this present moment. Nibi rains down on capitalist scaffoldings, revealing captured beings who are separated from the network of life, their value in terms of capital extracted, their bodies withering into disposability, spruce, pine, hemlock, and Douglas fir, their woody bodies destroyed into lumber or pulp, prairies tortured into farmland, rivers incarcerated into hydroelectric dams, land confiscated into highways and roads and pipelines and railways and houses and golf courses and parks, gold, silver, nickel, copper, copper, zinc, lead, zinc, iron, molybdenum, uranium, potash, and diamond captured and mined, shale arrested into oil, gas and bitumen, salmon, herring, and halibut dispossessed from oceans. What is left is fire, smoke, flood, and catastrophe, collapsing ecosystems with cascading, magnifying collateral death. When a Mojave says, Inich aha makavich etham, we are saying our name. We are telling a story of our existence. The river runs through the middle of my body. Anishinaabe grandparents held on to things, twist ties, tiny pieces of fishing line, scraps of material and buttons, cardboard, plastic food containers, newspapers, old cars and snowmobiles, 1 liter milk bags, all bags actually, elastic bands, jars, cans, and I could go on and on. Anything that was designed for one use, and still is washed, taped, or dried and used again and again. Something not useful in the moment may be useful in the future to repair, fix, recycle, or reuse in some way. Part of this habit was motivated by poverty, but part of it was motivated by love. The river runs through my body and tells the story of my existence. The one that cleans the world runs through me and reveals the story of my existence. These saved elastic bands. What happens when we write the analysis of what capitalism is and how it works from the perspective of those who caretake the world? From the point of view of the hunters and trappers and those who tan moose hides, from the position of those missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirit, queer, trans people, or those people who are targets of the most severe forms of colonial violence. What do we learn when we recenter the analysis of capitalism from the knowledge of those Indigenous women, those two-spirit, queer people whose lands, bodies, lives, languages, knowledge systems, and spirituality were stolen? Whose children, parents, grandchildren, and grandparents were stolen, who live with housing and food insecurity, limited access to healthcare, and diminished joy? Whose lives were stolen, eliminated, made visible, or shrunk so that the lives of white bourgeoisie women around the world could be more comfortable? We learned what our ancestors lived, that capitalism is incommensurable with Indigenous life. When Mojaves say the word for tears, we return to our word for river, as if our river was flowing from our eyes. Our river is flowing from my eyes. Our river in my body, shattered into dams and lift locks, pipes and plumbing, pools and sprinklers, is flowing from my eyes. We must go until we smell the black root wet anchoring the river's mud banks. We must go beyond to a place where we have never been, the center, where there is no center, beyond towards what does not need us, yet makes us. to unseparate, to beyond, towards, to braid with land and sky, to blue, to shimmer, to mouth into again, towards what does not need us, yet makes us. This last expert that I want to share today is not from Theory of Water. The first iteration of it was actually written in As We Have Always Done, which would have written this in maybe 2015. But I was thinking about it over these last 2 weeks because the Canadians are pretty upset right now. Pretty upset about the tariffs and the annexation. Upset that another colonial power might come and steal the natural resources they stole from Indigenous people. There's been booing at hockey games. That's how upset. So I wanted to revisit this piece a little bit because I've just been thinking about it. And it's called I Am Not a Nation State. I want my great-great-grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren to be able to live as Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg, unharassed and undeterred in our homeland. The idea of my arms embracing my grandchildren and their arms embracing their grandchildren is communicated in the Anishinaabe word kobade. Kobade is a word we use to refer to our great-grandparents and our great-grandchildren. It means a link in the chain, a link in a chain between generations. It isn't just me embracing my grandchildren, it's my grandparents embracing me. It's our grandparents embracing us. In my language, our nation is called Kinagatchi Nishnaabeg Oguming, the place where we all live and work together. Kinagatchi Nishnaabeg Oguming is not a nation state. It is a formation where we belong to each other and where we embody deep practices of care. It is a hub of Anishinaabe networks. It is a long kobade cycling through time. It is a web of connections to each other, to the plants and animals and rivers and lakes and oceans, the cosmos, and all the life with whom we share this planet. Kinagatchi Nishnaabeg Oguming is an ecology of intimacy and caretaking. It is an ecology of relationships in the absence of coercion, hierarchy, or authoritarian power. It is a horizontal, leaky network based on deep reciprocity, respect, non-interference, self-determination, and freedom. Kinagatchi Nishnaabeg Oguming is based on the idea that the earth gives and sustains all life, and that natural resources are not natural resources at all, but gifts from the land. Our practice of living is based on the foundational concept that we should give up what we can to support the integrity of our homelands and our communities for the coming generations. We should give more than we take. Kinagatchi Nishnaabeg Oguming is based on a series of radiating responsibilities. This is the intense love of land and of family that has always been the spine of Indigenous resistance. The fact that I'm here today is a miracle because it means my family, like every Indigenous family, did whatever they could to ensure that I survived the last 400 years of violence. In order for my our kobade, to survive and flourish the next 400 years, we need to join together in a rebellion of love, persistence, commitment, profound caring, and create constellations of co-resistance working together towards radical alternatives based on deep reciprocity and the gorgeous generative refusal of colonialism and racial capitalism. It is a clear mandate to create networks of reciprocal anti-colonial movements with other peoples radically imagining their ways out of domination and who are not afraid to let those imaginings destroy the pillars of settler colonialism. Kinagatchi and Nishnaabeg Ogaming demands a radical and a complete overturning of the nation-state's political formations. It demands that we reject the structures and processes and practices that end Indigenous life, Black life, Palestinian life, trans life, queer life, and results in the desecration and collapse of the ecological systems that enable all life on the planet. And so my teaching, my writing, my organizing, my breathing must align with and support Palestinian freedom struggles, the freedom struggles of people in Sudan and Congo and Haiti, radical Black freedom struggles, and anti-colonial struggles all over the global South. This is our beginning. Miigwech.
I really love the premise of a theory of water because it asks us to pause for a minute that there may be a theory of water, and the way in which you're positioning this kind of episteme, right, of Indigenous knowledge that really allows us to pause and to think. But I was also thinking with the snowflake and what a writerly practice you're in that moment of thick description and allowing us to think of the kind of changes and metaphors. I guess I'm wondering, in our kind of work of critical knowledge in this moment, what for you is a place of what you call a sovereign practice? I'm so struck by that because we're in a colonial institution. Many of us are kind of, academics with a paycheck. But you and your bio and your thinking is so much about this kind of place of sovereign cultural practice. And if you could just say more about that and how, in this moment, we can maybe approximate that and also live with that in a moment of a lot of collapse and attack on the colonial institution that I now find myself defending in many ways in this kind of frontal attack. So I hope that makes sense, and there's kind of comments and questions in there for you. Okay?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I wanted to think very carefully about how to use our time together given this moment that you guys are living through. And I was thinking back to how what it was like to be an undergrad, what it was like to be the only Indigenous kid in the classroom for years and years and years. And I think a lot of my writing is to that younger version of myself that was looking for moments to breathe. And I think sometimes it's important for us to come together and to stand together and to just disconnect a little bit and have this moment of refuge where our radical imaginations can start to work. We can take a breath, we can let go of some of the stress of the assault and start to think and to feel together and separately about how we can respond to this. So I don't have the answer to how we can respond to this, but I know one of my kids is in gender studies right now in their second year, and the last thing that they need right now is me coming in with like a big 45-minute lecture on the violence of colonialism, right? And so I think that that's what I wanted to contribute, and that's what I wanted to come in solidarity and sort of share these stories and share this origin story and remind us that there are many, many other peoples throughout time that have faced this moment. We can draw on their knowledge, we can draw on their resistance. There are forces all around us that are sort of cheering us on and are showing us other ways of living on the planet. And so we are not alone in this moment. And all of the The overwhelm is designed. It's designed and it's purposeful. And so what happens when we create a bit of space for ourselves to connect and to connect to each other and to connect to ideas and to start to think of how to organize our way out of this. What we're all on that back of the turtle right now in that flood.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing of what I felt like you were doing, kind of like embodied theorization, but also theorizing embodiment. And so just thank you for sharing your stories on that end. And I'm curious as to, as a reader and a writer and a thinker, what's your relationship to English, like as a language? Like, is it enough for you? Like, are there moments when you're trying to like resist that? And when I say English as a language, not just like English, but also like some of the ways in which like its grammar and structure bring in certain like sort of conditions, certain ways that we can think about certain relationships, or think about just, I don't know, the way that we like exist in this world. So I was just curious to hear a bit more about like you and your thinking on the English language. Thank you.
Yeah, it's 100% not enough. It's absolutely designed for a very particular worldview. And one of the ways that I demonstrate that, we were talking earlier about the film that I worked on called Bidaben. Bidaben is an Anishinaabe word that means dawn. It actually means the first light. So if you're watching the sunrise, you see that first little bit of light before the sun appears on the horizon, and it refers to that moment. And in Anishinaabe Moan, you can break the word down to reveal a deeper meaning. And so the prefix B means that the future is coming at you. Da means home or the present right now. And ba or ban is a suffix that you put on the end of someone's name after they've passed away. So it denotes the past. So what this word is teaching me is that first light of dawn that happens every morning, our present moment, is a collapsing in of the past and the future. And so when you're learning Anishinaabe Moan, you learn that the word for dawn is Bidaben. But that's not the whole story, right? And so all of our words, and the tinier words that they're made up with, are designed to communicate our worldview and our cosmos, which is deeply relational, which is about this network of life that I'm talking about. And so language learning, not just language learning, because I've taken 1 billion language classes and I'm terrible at it. But I don't want to be able to order hot dogs at the powwow, although I'd be like happy if I could do that. I'm interested in this deeper form of the language that communicates that worldview and those philosophies. So there's often 3 meanings. There's a literal meaning, there is a philosophical or conceptual meaning, and then there's often sort of a story that goes along with each word as well. So I think language learning is very, very, very important. But it's been a struggle for me. I would have to go back almost 5 generations to find a fluent speaker in my family, although one of my kids is becoming more fluent than me. Yeah.
I really appreciated your kind of telling, your version of telling of the creation story and origin story. And I had never thought about maybe what the perspectives of the water or the animals that had been in the water for days might have been. And so I was just wondering what other actors in those stories, specifically the creation story or the origin story, that you might be able to take inspiration from in our current climate, maybe like whether that's like the earth below being grabbed, or if it's the people above looking down, or the spirits above looking down. I was just wondering.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I like your earrings also.
Thank you.
So I was At first, I was sort of suspect of creation stories because they're often, a lot of the written versions are filtered through anthropologists or they're filtered through the church. And so they become very Ten Commandment like, very moralistic. And I think a lot of the power of those stories is sort of taken away and anglicized and colonized. And so I started to be really interested in oral storytelling and how these stories were being told in ceremony and how they were being told in the community, and watching Indigenous storytellers trying to shift meanings, and the stories were sort of leaky based on who they were telling them to. And so Doug was a really amazing storyteller, and he would often shift the story based on who the audience was. And when I asked him about it, he was like, well, the audience has to be able to see themselves in the story. And so the reason why middle-aged people are important is because he was like, you know what the kids are doing, you know what TikTok is, so you need to be able to tell the stories in a way that's relevant in contemporary times. And he felt like that was sort of the job of middle-aged. So this idea that the stories are sacred and they can only be told one way and they can only be told by the elders was something that he didn't really believe in. And I kind of inherited that our knowledge is for all of us, and that we all need to be able to find ourselves inside the story. So you need to be able to tell the stories in a way where queer and trans youth are going to see themselves in the story, right? And that they're going to be able to find meaning in that. And so in my practice, I've always tried to make that happen. And part of that is imagining yourself just what you said. Like, imagine yourself as the water, imagine yourself as the muskrat, imagine yourself, put yourself in all of the different perspectives and tell the story from all of the different angles. Because I think, again, these stories are very, very layered. There's a literal version, there's a metaphorical version, there's a conceptual version, there's a version that's attached to other stories, and the meaning shifts as you hear and tell the stories throughout your life. So there's that repetition and there's that rehearsal that happens in our storytelling. And I think that makes the stories really dense and beautiful, and it creates this body of literature that is so much thicker than just that, like, dusty old sort of horrible 6-line thing in the anthropology paper. Yeah, so thank you for that. And I think the other thing is that in storytelling, it's not me, like, I'm not the one that gets to tell you what they mean. Everybody inserts themselves in the story and has a responsibility to work with the story to find meaning. So it's a much different kind of a horizontal system of knowledge sharing, where we create meaning together, and where everybody from a 4-year-old child to a 90-year-old elder has a responsibility for thinking through the story from all these different angles to contribute to this richness of meaning.
Just amazing talk. I'm so excited for the book. As much as I enjoyed the talk, I was sort of overcome by a sense of dissonance between your beautiful words and these ancestral stories and this call to refusal against the backdrop of this very colonial space, right? This beautiful, like, newly refurbished colonial molding that's in one sense stunning, but also like not just a vestige, but a stark reminder of where we are. And I'm wondering, first of all, personally for you, do you feel that sense of dissonance, just being up here sharing these words in this space? And regardless of whether you feel that or not, can you just speak to the experience of trying to kind of evoke an otherwise, or precisely a refusal against that which we're so clearly enmeshed in here?
I think that dissonance has always been part of my life, for BIPOC people, for Indigenous people. That's just something that's been normalized. And I think earlier versions of me might have, like, as a student, I was really an activist and speaking out kind of constantly. And I think I thought that my career might go in this one direction. But I think what I learned is that the idea that, yeah, we have to refuse all this stuff. Absolutely. We have to refuse this moment. We can't obey. We can't agree. But we also have to generate the alternative. We have to embody the alternative. We have to take care of each other. We have to take care of the people that have targets on their back right now. We have to educate. There's all of these other things that we have to do. And so sure, we're in this colonial building, and together we transformed it into this space that we've just shared together, where I hope that everybody feels a little bit more connected. And so that idea of refusing but making the refusal generative is something that I think is really important in sustaining movements. It's important in sustaining lives. We have to have moments of joy and connection. That's really important in this work, or it ends really fast.
Thank you so much for this. It was really wonderful to hear you speak. I'm really struck by a phrase that you offered us from, I think, in the third piece that you shared about working on a scale beyond our comprehension. And I think that's something that I think about a lot. And I would love to hear you say a little bit more about either what that looks like for you or even just what it feels like. I think for me, I'm most excited by sort of questions that I have absolutely no idea how to answer, or knots that I have no idea how to disentangle, but it feels worthwhile, like sitting in the middle of them, which oscillates between feeling really exciting but also really frustrating. So I would just love to hear you say a little bit more about what that looks like for you in terms of thinking and writing, or just as a sort of like lived practice. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I started thinking about scale because in Anishinaabe thought, what you do as an individual, how you practice that in your kind of immediate chosen family, scales out into our political systems and into our systems. And at the core of that are sort of the seven ancestor teachings, the Dene laws. They're practices of care. They're practices of empathy. They're mutual aid. And so I started to think about how did my ancestors put that at the center of the world and then build out from there. And of course, like, colonialism tells me that my people are not very smart and that we're like nomadic and we're just wandering around with these simple, be kind to each other, skipping through the forest picking berries. But I was like, I'm rejecting that. That's not right, and that's not true. And what I do a lot of work in the far north, in Dene territory, where we take students out on the land and live together with elders. And you see the elders embodying these teachings and embodying this system of care. And next week I'm going up to teach a course on mutual aid, where that's sort of the center of it. So I think that I'm interested in taking, and you can't do this work around systems of care without other people, without deep relationships, and without nurturing and putting a lot of energy into those deep relationships. And so that's what I think you're talking about, that moment where you have these ideas and these ethics of how you want to live, but then how do you scale it up with people who are different than you, who have different needs, who have different care needs than you? And I think that, for me, has been the most generative sorts of situations that I've been in my life, is trying to figure that out. Right? Yeah. So thank you.
You've addressed this to a degree, but I'm wondering if you had a handful of pieces of advice for the young students here who, you were there maybe 20 years ago or some number of decades, for how to navigate everything that you've been talking about, and like how to get through this and how to see themselves like 10 or 20 years from now.
I do not have any advice for students. I mean, I feel like I like to hear the advice students have for me. I feel like I feel like it's very difficult to be a student right now, and I feel like particularly this cohort of students who are in high school during COVID-19, like your world has ended several times now, and so I don't think that I have anything from, 1989 that's going to be useful to you guys. But I think that, heading back to your point, I think that I love being in communities where there's people of all different ages and all different experiences, because I think that kind of coming together and sharing and visiting and forging relationships is where we figure out how we can help and share each other. And I like it best when it's mutual, right? Like I learn a lot from my students. I've learned a lot from my kids, probably the most that I've learned from my kids. And so, I don't know, I kind of shy away from this, like, I'm an old person who's been around the block a few times, and here's some lessons for you. I'm a mess, I don't know. I've never been in this situation with facing what we're facing right now. But, I'm grateful that I'm on the planet with so many fantastic, amazing BIPOC students right now who are imagining their ways out of this and who are acting. And I feel like you guys schooled us with your encampments. You led the way. And so I think actually the job of professors and staff in this is to be asking the other questions, like, what do you guys need from us? How can we support you? How can we make our courses more relevant? How can you find meaning in my course syllabi?
Thank you so much for your offerings tonight, and also just for always keeping Palestine afloat in the waters of your theory. I have a question, because I think I've also done something similar from an Indigenous Palestinian perspective, thinking with the land, but the move from the land to the water that I'm recognizing in your work, grounded normativity and land as pedagogy and these kind of concepts and terms that you've been, developed that have really been formative in my thinking as well about Palestine, and then moving from land as pedagogy to theory of water. And I've just written a chapter about Palestinian liquid ontologies and thinking, because, our cause and our struggle is so often reduced to the land in a way that erases our relationships with water. And so it's kind of like a return in a way. And I think also the way that colonization works, conquest is, done through and across water and pushing Indigenous people away from those connections to our rivers, our coasts, our springs. So yeah, I'm just curious to hear from you more how you got from the land to the water.
There's a couple of different answers to that. I think culturally, the water and water teachings are often carried by Anishinaabe women and Two-Spirit and queer people, and the land is man on the land sort of thing. And so I've always tried to break down that dichotomy in my work. And then within Anishinaabe thought, water is part of the land and da-da-da-da-da, but it's always been kind of very gendered. And even in Canadian Indigenous politics, you have male leaders that are talking about the land and are scaffolding other issues like gender violence to be like, we'll talk about that once we get the land back. So that's one answer. Another answer is that I spent a lot of time on the shores of lakes, and I noticed, here I am on the shore, I've got the sky world, I've got the water world, and I've got the land world. This is a place of intense overlap. And so another Michi Saagiig Nishnaabeg scholar, Madeline Wheatung, who's at Toronto Metropolitan University, talks about the shore as a place where Anishinaabe people learn consent, learn accountability, because it's a place of overlap. that's constantly shifting. Sarah Hunt also works on that. So then I started to think about the shore, and then I started to kind of trace, and this part is in the book. We used to have eels that would come into Anishinaabe territory through the Great Lakes and then up through the rivers that lived in the Sargasso Sea. So the network then it goes up in scale really quickly. So then I'm like, I don't know anything about the ocean. So in order to learn about the ocean, I'm going to need all these amazing Black feminist scholars like Alexis, who are doing all this great work. And then I start to think about water, but it changes form from a solid to a liquid to a gas, right? It's constantly shifting. It's constantly in motion. It's constantly changing form. The global water cycle connects every living thing on the planet. And so it became like so obvious to me that it's an embodied teaching about the network of life. And so I think that's what the book is sort of about, me thinking alongside water towards another visioning of life on the planet. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was gorgeous and so generative for me. I love thinking through water in the oceanic across the vantage point of the global south, the transatlantic and transpacific. And I found really beautiful everything, but specifically what you shared in excerpt 3, I believe, where you discussed the concept of Nibi. Nibi as regenerated, that while Nibi may be hurt, Nibi is regenerated. And then you named that Nibi is a fugitive, which really struck me. And you invited us to think through what happens when we center the analysis of capitalism and colonialism from the vantage point of Indigenous women, queer, trans, two-spirit folks whose lives were stolen and dispossessed. And so I'm thinking of this in relation to Nibi as fugitive, and I'm thinking of a non-human fugitivity that you're offering us to acknowledge the agentive capacity of water in relation to refusal and regeneration. And so I'd love to hear more about what can be regenerated from those dispossessed, human and non-human and otherwise. Thank you.
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about all of our radical imaginings, right? We can't comprehend the scale of what can be imagined when we put these things at the center. So I have this echo of how my people used to live in a time prior to colonialism and prior to capitalism, that was arrested and couldn't move forward because of that container. And so now I see sort of my responsibility, or I don't know, maybe I just like doing it, is trying to think about the beautiful possibilities of living otherwise. And I think it's never going to be one, as this story sort of, as that origin story sort of pointed out, it's never going to be one species or one being's idea. We've already seen what happens when it's just a single rich white man's idea, right? So what happens when we fall into that diversity and figure out a way to respect each other's self-determination to build otherwise. Yeah, so I don't know what the answer is, but I'm super excited to be thinking alongside and dreaming alongside and now making alongside all of you. Right? Okay.
Hi, I'm completely new to your work and everything, and I really liked hearing the different types of excerpts that you did tonight, so I could kind of get a good idea of your writing. And I was just kind of wondering, do you find yourself gravitating to one style of writing depending on like a topic, or, you know, like essay writing versus poetry versus short story, like, or is it just kind of like whatever kind of flows at the moment?
I have trouble fitting in to disciplines and genres, in part because I feel like I quit a tenure track position 25 or 30 years ago, and I just based my practice sort of on within Anishinaabe thought and within indigeneity. And so I didn't have the constraints of like a tenure file or an assignment or getting a degree to kind of confine my work. And so I think the spine of my work is always the same, whether it comes out as poetry or fiction or nonfiction or academic work or in the band or in film. It's all the same thing, but it reaches different audiences. And I think it's an embodied practice. And that's the part that I don't know where it fits, but every once in a while I'm like, well, that's the last time I'm ever going to write an academic paper, or that's the last time I'm done with the band, I'm not making another record. But I always come back to these four things. I think my creativity and my intellectual practice needs all of the components, and they all kind of when I started performing music in a band, I think that I became a better lecturer because I don't want to just read. If you lose the audience when you're a musician, you failed. And so I didn't want to just get up and read my like dusty old professor paper and watch people fall asleep. So I had to figure out a better way of engaging with audiences and sort of setting up the environment. It made me start to think about engagements like this outside of me just reading something and proving to you that I know big words or whatever. So yeah, I think all of the different practices are important to me. Thank you for that. Thank you.